Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are going deep on something I think a lot of you guys can relate to. Masculinity.
Yeah.
Specifically, all the forces that are shaping how men experience it today. And, I know a lot of you guys are familiar with red pill ideas, covert contract.
Right.
But this deep dive is really going to take us beyond those initial revelations into some seriously thought-provoking territory.
Yeah, and I think what's often missing from these conversations is a broader historical context.
Yeah.
Like, we need to understand how these ideas about masculinity have evolved, where these pressures originated, and how they've taken root in our institutions. I think that's really crucial.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this book we're diving into today so fascinating.
Okay.
It's called The Hegelian Trap: How Postmodern Ideological Coercion Attacks Masculinity. And the author, Conrad Riker, writes from a very personal perspective. He's a married man, like a lot of you guys listening.
Right.
And he really felt the weight of these ideologies in his own life.
Yeah. I think that personal stake often fuels the most insightful analysis,
Yeah.
When someone is directly impacted by an issue,
Right.
they're more likely to dig deeper and really get to the heart of the matter.
Yeah, and he does not hold back.
He doesn't.
Riker tackles some massive topics here.
Yeah.
The misuse of Hegelian dialectic, the subversion of masculinity throughout history, the war on boy,
Right.
the inversion of sexual dynamic, or the collapse of institutions.
Right.
I mean, it's a dense read,
Yeah.
but it really connects the dots.
It does.
One of the things that makes this book so powerful is it doesn't just present a problem.
Right.
It offers a framework for understanding that problem,
Yep.
and then empowers men to actually take action and reclaim their identity.
Exactly.
So let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Okay, first up, the Hegelian trap.
Right.
I'll be honest, I needed a little refresher on Hegel's dialectic.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple concept at its core.
Okay.
You have a thesis,
Right.
which is an idea or a status quo. Then you have its opposite, the antithesis.
Okay.
The clash between those two creates a synthesis, a new understanding that incorporates elements of both.
Gotcha.
And it's essentially a model for how knowledge and societies progress.
Right, but Riker argues that this process has been well hijacked.
Yeah, he's saying that instead of genuine debate and an organic arrival at a synthesis,
Yeah.
we're seeing a manipulation of the dialectic. It's being used to force specific ideologies, often by just shutting down dissent and predetermining the outcome.
He uses the example of gender pronouns
Yes.
to illustrate this.
Right, so the thesis is that everyone should use preferred pronoun. A natural antithesis would be the argument that enforcing pronoun usage is compelled speech,
Okay.
potentially infringing on free expression.
Right.
But instead of engaging with that counter-argument, it's immediately labeled as bigotry,
Yeah.
effectively silencing any opposition and solidifying the original thesis.
Like they're short-circuiting the whole process, skipping a step to control the outcome.
Exactly. That's Riker's point. The Hegelian dialectic in this context isn't about arriving at truth through open discourse.
Yeah.
It's about using the framework to impose a specific ideology.
And he traces this subversion of masculinity back centuries,
Right.
right? It's not just a recent phenomenon.
Yeah, he goes all the way back to Rousseau, the Enlightenment thinker.
Okay.
Rousseau believed that men needed to be educated away from their natural masculinity. Riker then connects this to how Marxist and socialist ideologies viewed masculinity as inherently oppressive, something to be eradicated for the sake of equality.
He also talks about the impact of the feminist movement in the 1960s and 70s.
Right. He cites influential books from that era, like The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, The Male Ego. These works challenged traditional gender roles, which was significant.
Right.
However, Riker argues that these movements, while aiming for positive change, also paved the way for a more radical critique of masculinity.
Okay.
One that ultimately demonized many aspects of manhood that are actually beneficial.
And these ideas didn't stay confined to books and academia.
This is a crucial point.
Right.
Riker isn't just talking about abstract theory. He's demonstrating how these ideas manifested in the real world, impacting everything from how boys are raised to how men are portrayed in popular culture and how laws are structured.
Speaking of raising boys, he has a whole chapter called The War on Boy.
Right.
And this one really resonated with me.
It's a provocative title,
Yeah.
but Riker backs it up with some compelling arguments.
Wow.
His point is that boys are often disadvantaged in education systems designed primarily for girls' learning styles. He cites statistics about boys being more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD,
Right.
receive suspensions, and have lower college attendance rates.
It's almost as if we're punishing boys for simply being boys.
That's essentially what Riker is arguing.
Yeah.
Society, he says, pressures boys to suppress their natural instincts and interests, which are often perceived as disruptive in environments that prioritize compliance and quiet attentiveness.
Right.
It's a setup for failure for many boys.
And it's not like this pressure lets up once boys become men.
Right. Not at all.
Riker talks about this inversion of sexual dynamics.
Right.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Especially in the context of relationships.
Absolutely.
So what is he talking about there?
Well, Riker does a really good job here of unpacking the toxic masculinity narrative.
Okay.
You know, this idea that men are inherently bad or dangerous.
Right.
And he argues that it creates a real double bind for men.
Oh, so.
On the one hand, society demands sensitivity and emotional expression from men.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, any display of traditional masculinity is often deep.
So it's like a no-win situation?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, Riker uses the example of that Gillette ad from a few years ago.
Oh, yeah, the one that basically said all men are terrible.
Yeah, the one that portrayed men so negatively and called on them to be better.
Right.
And he points out the hypocrisy of the message.
Okay.
Like, it completely ignores men's biological roles as providers and protectors.
Right. They're ignoring basic biology.
Exactly. Roles that have deep roots in evolutionary psychology.
So it's not just about societal expectation.
No.
It's about our fundamental nature as men.
Right. Riker argues that while we should absolutely address harmful behaviors, we can't just dismiss or demonize masculinity altogether.
Yeah.
It's an essential part of who we are, something that needs to be understood, not eradicated.
And this is where I think the book really speaks to the red pill community, especially those of us who are married.
Right.
Riker dives into this whole idea of psychological warfare
Yeah.
that's often waged against men,
Yeah.
particularly within the context of relationships.
It can feel that way sometimes.
It really can. And he deconstructs some pretty pervasive myths, like the myth of male privilege.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
He points out that despite all the talk about male privilege, men are actually more likely to commit suicide,
Right.
experience homelessness, and be victims of violent crime.
It's true.
These are like uncomfortable truths that often get ignored.
Absolutely. And that's exactly Riker's point.
It's almost like a complete inversion of reality.
He challenges readers to question these accepted narratives, to look at the evidence and form their own conclusions.
And he also tackles other harmful tropes,
Yes.
like fragile masculinity, rape culture, the pay gap.
Right. All those things that get thrown around a lot in arguments.
Exactly. And it's important to understand that Riker isn't denying the existence of these issues.
No, not at all.
What he's doing is challenging the
Yes.
and often misleading ways in which they're presented. He argues that these narratives often lack nuance and fail to acknowledge the complexities of gender dynamics, especially within a marriage.
Absolutely. It's not that simple.
It's like he's saying, let's have a real honest conversation about these issues.
Right.
One that's based on facts and logic, not just emotion and ideology.
Exact. And that's a powerful message, especially for men who feel like their voices are being silenced or dismissed.
This leads us to what Riker calls the collapse of institution. He argues that this postmodern ideology has infiltrated our courts, our schools, even the family unit itself.
And he provides some pretty stark examples.
Yeah, like what?
For instance, how courts often favor women in custody battles,
Right.
regardless of the father's involvement.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Or how schools are increasingly adopting curricula that promote gender fluidity and downplay traditional gender roles.
Right.
This is something that directly impacts men who are going through divorce and custody arrangements.
It's like the very structures that are supposed to support and protect families are being turned against us.
That's a powerful image, and it gets to the core of Riker's argument. He's saying that these institutions are no longer neutral arbiters. They've been influenced by an ideology that actively undermines traditional values.
Right.
And in his view, erodes the foundation of society itself.
It can feel pretty bleak, to be honest.
It can.
Especially if you're going through a divorce or dealing with family court.
Absolutely.
But this book isn't about despair, is it?
No, it's a call to action.
Oh, and that's what we're going to explore next. How men can actually reclaim their identity and navigate these challenges effectively. Okay, so we've loaded out a lot of heavy stuff, but now I want to get to the part I think a lot of you are waiting for.
Okay.
What can we do about all of this?
Right.
Especially for, the guys in the married red pill community who are trying to understand their own situation.
Yeah.
And maybe, renegotiate those covert contracts.
That's where the rubber meets the road. You know, Riker gives us the map, but we're the ones who have to navigate the terrain, make choices, and take action.
And Riker ends the book with this question that's really been echoing in my head ever since I read it. He says, how can you as a man, aware of these forces, navigate relationships, family, and society in a way that honors your authentic self while fostering positive change?
It's a big question,
It's a huge question.
especially for those of us who are married.
Yeah, and trying to figure out how to apply red pill principles within that commitment.
Yeah. It's a powerful question, and it doesn't have an easy answer.
No, it doesn't.
But it's something every man needs to grapple with.
Yeah.
We can't just wish for a return to some idealized past.
Right.
The world has changed, and we need to find a way to understand and express our masculinity within that context.
That doesn't mean just conforming to whatever the current narrative is, right?
No, absolutely not.
Especially when that narrative often feels so hostile to traditional masculinity.
It's about finding a balance,
Yeah.
you know? How do we integrate the best aspects of traditional masculinity?
Okay.
Strength, responsibility, leadership with the realities of the modern world.
Yeah, it's a tough question.
It is. How do we be strong but also sensitive providers, but also partners,
Right.
but also listeners?
Yeah. How do we reconcile red pill awareness with the commitment of marriage?
That's the challenge.
It's about being a good man, a good husband in the truest sense.
Yes.
But doing it in a way that doesn't erase who we are or deny our innate masculine nature.
And that takes real work, especially in the context of a marriage where those expectations might have been built on a shaky foundation.
The record talks a lot about reclaiming identity.
He does.
What does that actually look like in a practical sense?
Okay.
For the guys listening who are already married and dealing with those covert contracts.
It starts with self-awareness.
Okay.
And being in the married red pill community is a great first step. You're already questioning those unspoken agreements and looking for a deeper understanding. Riker challenges us to go further,
Okay.
to recognize how we might have internalized these negative narratives about masculinity ourselves.
So, like, what assumptions are we carrying about what it means to be a husband, a father, a man?
Exactly. Where are those assumptions coming from? Are they serving us or are they holding us back?
It's like taking the red pill, but on a whole other level.
It is.
And then figuring out what to do with those realizations within the framework of a marriage.
Exactly. And it's not just about deconstructing harmful ideas, it's about building something new, something stronger. Riker talks about focusing on self-improvement,
Right.
developing our skills, pursuing our passion. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves, both physically and mentally.
That's a common theme in the red pill community, right?
Yes.
Self-improvement, taking control of your life. But how do you balance that with being a good husband?
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Riker argues that true strength comes from embracing those masculine virtues.
Okay.
Not in a domineering way,
Right.
but in a way that uplifts and strengthens everyone around us. That's how we lead, how we protect, how we provide, not just for ourselves, but for our wives, our children, our community.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Being assertive without being aggressive. Being a leader in a way that empowers, not controls, being a protector without being suffocating.
Exactly. And that can be tough to navigate, especially in a marriage where those patterns might already be established.
Right.
It requires honesty, communication, and a willingness to renegotiate those covert contracts to build a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding.
So Riker's book doesn't offer easy answers. It's more like a roadmap for a journey
Yes.
that each man has to take for himself, figuring out how those principles apply to his own unique situation.
And it's a journey that requires courage.
Why is that?
Because challenging the status quo, speaking up for what you believe in, even within your own marriage, standing up for your own needs as a man,
Yeah,
that takes guts.
it does.
But I think for a lot of guys listening, it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely.
It's about reclaiming your identity, your purpose, your freedom as a man, even within the commitment of marriage.
And in doing so, you create a space for masculinity to be seen not as a threat, but as a force for good in your marriage, in your family, in the world.
Right.
So the guys out there wrestling with these questions, exploring the red pill,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to be the best husbands and fathers they can be, while still honoring their own needs as men.
Yes.
I highly recommend checking out the Hegelian Trap.
That's a good one.
It's a dense read, but it's packed with insight.
It is.
You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It might not give you all the answers, but it will definitely give you a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And a framework for moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Keep those conversations going. Keep questioning, keep learning, keep striving to be the best men you can be.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
We'll see you on the next one.